Kappa Alphas, this is a serious matter virtual forum and town hall from protest to power, sponsored by the Pine Sol products. I'm Star Jones, and it is with great honor and humility that I again greet you on behalf of the leadership of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated as your moderator for this evening. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated is the nation's oldest Greek letter organization established by African American college women in 1908. We are an organization of nearly 300,000 members with over 1,000 chapters located all over the world. Alpha Kappa Alpha recognizes that people right now have taken to the streets in cities and around the country and around the world over the past few weeks with demonstrations to protest the recent killings of Black Americans and to advocate for racial justice. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated is hosting tonight's virtual forum and town hall to try and provide context to current events and to give voice to our members who are rightly outraged and concerned about the racial disparities that still exist in all parts of American society. This evening, we will explore what was happening in the U.S. in the mid-20th century that brought about the civil rights movement, similarities and differences with the recent protests, and the struggles for social and economic equality that remain. Tonight, it is with great pleasure that I again start this evening with a woman who brings intellect, organization, style, and grace to the table of influence. Dr. GLENDA Glover, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and the International President of Tennessee State University. Dr. Glover is the leader of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. As I said, an organization of nearly 300,000 members and over 1,000 chapters located all over the world. We are the oldest Greek letter organization established by African American college women 110 years ago in 1908. Dr. Glover is a certified public accountant, a licensed attorney, and one of a handful of African American women to hold a PhD, CPA, JD combination in the United States. Yes, she's a bad sister right there. Professionally, Dr. Glover serves as president of Tennessee State University, her beloved alma mater, and is the institution's 8th and first woman president. She knows that out of respect and deference, I always refer to her as Madam Supreme. So it is only fitting that she opened this evening with a welcome to all of our sorors from across the world and, of course, our guests who joined us this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. GLENDA Glover. Dr. Glover?
Thank you, Star Jones. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to greet you on behalf of Alpha Kappa Alpha in This is a Serious Matter series, where we are proud that the younger generation is taking the lead in this discussion. What's next? Moving from protest to power. We'll symbol this evening as a collective power because we know that if ever there was a time that we needed each other, that time is now. We're here to turn obstacles into opportunities, problems into pathways, challenges into change, struggle into strategy, and anguish into activism. And we're here to persuade leaders and legislators to dismantle the racist attitudes that still permeate throughout this nation with a cry that enough is really enough. The disparity in employment, education can only be corrected through economic parity. This is our moment of demand. Demand that the economical and educational and political power, not only because it is fair, but because it is right. Demand American leadership to live up to the promises of liberty and justice for all, not just for some, but for all. So tonight is special. It is action filled. It is about strong Black women, raising our collective power, our voices for change. It's about young people who are leading this movement. It is about undergraduates who are on the front lines for justice. It is about passing the torch to the next generation. Thank you for joining us tonight and continuing to engage with us in this fight for racial justice and equality.
Thank you, Dr. Glover. As the international president of Alpha Kappa Alpha, you are well suited to one, bring that welcome, but also to emphasize Alpha Kappa Alpha's dedication and commitment to community service, advocacy, and civil rights. What at this point in time should Alpha Kappa Alpha women be focused on as we move to this second phase of protest to power?
Well, Alpha Kappa Alpha is by definition a service organization.
Yes,
We
ma'am.
were started based on service. And the significance in 1908, when the separate but equal doctrine had legally become the law of the land a little over a decade earlier. We lived in a segregated world compounded by male dominance. It was against this backdrop that 9 young ladies, the founders of Alpha Kappa Alpha, thought it was important enough to stress that college-educated women could create a network where they would serve the community. Service started back in 1908 to serve the community and help others. So they stressed education, they stressed economics as a way out. So these 9 women changed the world. So it was a time of political protest, demanding civil rights for Black people, the violent hostility, the waves of race riots. So we started a service at that time, it continued. So now we continue to in 2020, when we're now stressing voter registration, voter mobilization, get out to vote, the census projects, taking a stand against racial discrimination and injustice everywhere. That's our legacy, and that's who we are.
And I am so proud to be a member of this organization that stretches back to 1908, where women decided to take on the mantle of struggle and equality. Thank you, Dr. Glover. We appreciate so much you joining us this evening.
Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Bernice King. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the King Center. Ladies and gentlemen, you know Dr. King. She is a minister and the youngest child of civil rights leaders Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King. She was 5 years old when her father was assassinated. Dr. King's primary focus as CEO of the King Center and in life is to ensure that her father's nonviolent philosophy and methodology, which the King Center calls Nonviolence 365, is integrated in various sects of society, including education, government, business, media, arts and entertainment, and sports. Dr. King believes that Nonviolence 365 is the answer to society's problems and promotes it being embraced as a way of life. She is also the CEO, of the First Kingdom Management, a Christian consulting firm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Dr. King, I welcome you so much. So, sister, you are rightly the person to put this all in perspective. As Dr. Glover hands the mantle over to you, what are your thoughts on moving us from protests to power?
Well, let me just start by saying that I'm honored to be here tonight and to be a part of this sorority. And I believe that where we are right now, as we think about this notion of from protest to power, it really is about that whole continuum of moving from the posture of speaking up and making our discontents known to now positioning ourselves using the Supreme Basilis's word, demands known. When we look at the historical context around the civil rights movement, my father and them framed what they were doing as nonviolent direct action, of which peaceful, and I won't use the word peaceful, but which protest is a part of. As we all know, protest is basically a public expression of our disapproval or objection to an issue or an idea or an action. And the direct action that my father and them were involved in really focused more about moving past just expressing that disapproval to really looking at goals. How do we attach our protest to an ultimate goal? The whole purpose and premise of nonviolent direct action was to put pressure and demand and put pressure and demands on power constructs and power systems, and to create a tension around all of that so that the demands can be met. The whole purpose when they employed direct action, whether it be marches, whether it be sit-ins, whether it be protests, whether it be boycotts, the whole purpose was to create enough tension in the environment so that those who you are trying to get the attention of can come either to a table of negotiation or back to a table of negotiation if there had been a table of negotiation. And the whole premise is we're not trying to destroy you. We're not trying, for instance, in Montgomery, Daddy often said our goal was not to put the bus company out of business, but to put justice in business. Now, it did not mean that the demands that were made would not cause an economic squeeze. It did not mean that there may not be some economic suffrage, but the goal of the nonviolent protester, nonviolent demonstrator, nonviolent boycotter is to say we are withdrawing our support from this evil system until this evil system addresses and meets our demands. And so I wanted to lay that out. And, you know, oftentimes when we think about the movement that my father led, we think about it in terms of, you know, people always say that, you know, the nonviolence versus violence, you know, which is the better route. And, you know, people even criticized him during the movement when he wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail about creating tension. Because I'm sure that's what, when all of this occurred, I'm sure there were people that were kind of pointing fingers and, you know, they are creating the tension in our environment, in our society. But the reality is that the nonviolent practitioner is not afraid of tension. It's a constructive tension. It's not a violent tension. It's the kind of tension that arrests people's attention, calls them to focus on what the issue is at hand, and to begin to address those demands. So, you know, I just want to emphasize 3 words that are always critical when you think about moving from protest to power. The first thing is nonviolent direct action is always strategic. It's always organized. It always has an ultimate goal in mind. You don't just protest for protest's sake. You are protesting because you have a goal in mind. And therefore, when you're in the midst of exercising this right, you stay focused on that so you don't get distracted by anything else that tries to, you know, interrupt and take you off focus. Like such was the case, you know, recently when those people who were the provocateurs, those people who tried to come in the middle of what was happening and change the narrative. If you know that your goal is this, you have to stay focused on that, that goal, and not take your attention and your mind and off of it.
Yeah, Dr. King, I was actually taking notes. I'm glad that I have the computer here because I am typing as you speak right now. When I asked you about protest the power, it is interesting to me. You twisted that and it's protest the power with purpose, according to what you've laid out with us, strategic, organized with an ultimate goal. Looking at purposeful, strategic, organized, and goal-oriented protests, what are the lessons learned from the past, do you think, that can inform the present with what our young people are trying to accomplish?
Well, I mean that you listed some of them. I think the first lesson that we learned is that nonviolence is actually the means to create the ultimate change. Violence actually creates bigger problems, more complicated issues and problems. The second thing is that the biggest lesson is that again, you are not trying to defeat or destroy a person. Nonviolence always seeks to defeat injustice and not people. And it's very difficult when people are the ones creating the injustice. So there are scenarios and situations where you recognize that there are situations like in the police situation where people have to be removed out of certain positions, but you never get so consumed with the person that you lose ultimate sight of the goal at hand. Because the issue is we're trying to eradicate these evil structures of racism. And the best way to do that is to keep the issue on the issue, because sometimes we forget that, you know, and so much other stuff comes into play. So the biggest thing that we can do right now is to make sure that we stay focused on the issue, make sure the narrative stays what it is, that nobody changes our narrative. Daddy was very good at articulating the narrative as the spokesperson. And the other lesson I want to say is, because there's been this whole conversation around, you know, leadership, and you know, in the new movement, there's the, you know, it's some people said leaderless, which I think is a misnomer, because there are people with influence that are leading in different ways in this time. So there are leaders. Perhaps there is not a cadre of recognized and identifiable spokespersons. My father was recognized as a spokesperson for the movement. And I do think in this time, there still has to be a cadre of people who help to craft and help to communicate the message and the narrative so that people don't hijack the narrative. That's probably one of the best lessons that we can learn, because otherwise, you know, people will begin to get confused about what it is that we are focusing on. People will begin to point fingers. And then the big thing is the conquer and divide, divide and conquer, excuse me. So I think that's one of the other lessons that we have to learn. The other thing, finally, is when my father and them were working throughout the South, the SCLC was established by 100 Christian pastors. And they worked through affiliates. And so although SCLC was headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, when they went to Birmingham, they worked with an affiliate in Birmingham. And I'm pointing this out because so often when we are doing this kind of movement work today, there are efforts on people's parts to start something new. And I think what's going to be potent for us as a people going forward is that we not dilute our strength, but we fortify by asking the question, who's already doing this work? And how can I join in it instead of starting something fresh? Because as I said, again, that kind of dilutes our strength. And since we're in the minority, we need as much, you know, galvanizing and coordinating and connecting as we can get. And there was one other thought that I had, and I'm losing it right now. Maybe it'll come up later on at the end. But you know, it's gone at this point.
Well, I'll help. We're going to be together for a while, so maybe we'll be able to bring it back. But finally, before we move on, I do want to point out there are a number of young people, Dr. King, that speak the words, "My vote does not count." They oftentimes think that their voice does not matter. But I'd like to point out that both your parents were under 30, and your father was, in fact, 25, 26 when they became involved in the civil rights movement in the late 50s and throughout the 60s. So what would you say to young people who don't know what to do, but know they want the world to change? How do they use their voice?
The first thing I want them to do is stop looking at changing the world, because that's overwhelming. I mean, if your vision is to change the world, oh my God, good luck. What you have to do is start right where you are. You have to have a vision of where you are. People forget that my father at the age of 26 years and my mother was 28. He was in Montgomery, Alabama, a little small city in the United States of America, doing local work that had global impact ultimately. And I think if more of us really focused in on the local work that has to be done, we could really make some progress. There's so much to do on the local level. When you're talking about policing, that is practically a localized issue, a statewide and localized issue. You know, imagine all of the affiliates working in all of the different pockets around the country with a collective agenda and demands around that, and people are working in their localized community. So that's what I would say. Start where you are, focus on your local community, and then plug in, you know, to what's happening in the national realm, if that's what you want to do. But there's a lot of local work that needs to be done.
There's an old saying that all politics is local, because that's really where the work starts out. Your city council races, your school board races, your local sheriff races. Those are the things that are going to impact on your daily life.
And let me mention this one thing. What you do locally, as I said, can have national implications. I think about the mayor of Stockton, California, and you know, he started this whole campaign about a livable wage. You know, my father talked about that during his lifetime, and guaranteed income. And he just took a certain select part of his population, and he began to give out $500 checks. And what they found, to some people's surprise, is people utilized that money for the needs that they had and not wasted the money, because there's always this concern. We don't want to do a handout, you know, but people are not asking for a handout. There are real economic disadvantages because of this, you know, racially suppressive and white supremacist system. And so, you know, that local issue is going to get traction in other places. And so I just wanted to say that to people. Just because it's localized doesn't mean that it can't be a model for another city, another community.
Thank you so very much, Dr. King. We appreciate your perspective. We're glad that you're going to be able to stay with us as we get to the town hall portion of our program a little bit later on. We really do appreciate you putting this all in the perspective of the past so that it can inform our present and move us towards a much brighter future. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, TAMIKA D. Mallory, who is an activist and the founder and president of MALLORY Consulting. TAMIKA Mallory is, as I said, an American activist. She was one of the leading organizers of the 2017 Women's March, for which she and her 3 other co-chairs were recognized in the Time 100 that year. TAMIKA is a proponent of gun control, feminism, and the Black Lives Matter movement. She is president of MALLORY Consulting, a strategic planning and event management firm in New York City. She sits on the board of directors for Gathering for Justice, an organization aimed at ending child incarceration and working to eliminate policies that produce mass incarceration. I am so pleased to again be sitting down with TAMIKA, and I start her with the exact same question. TAMIKA, what are your thoughts on how we move from protest to power?
Well, thank you. Hi, Star, and everyone. And
hi, TAMIKA.
Thank you to the AKAs who have invited me to be a part of this conversation, particularly my sister, Rosalind Brock, and also to Dr. Bernice King, who is a mentor and a very, very powerful voice that I often listen to, even when she has to slap me on the wrist and tell me that whatever I'm doing is not right. So, you know, I have to make sure people know that even I get checked by the big guns sometimes. You know, Star, I think that protest to power is like exactly the moment that we're in. And I want to make sure that people, especially young folks, don't feel like we're saying don't protest. We need the protests. The protests on the ground are extremely important. And I hope that young people not only continue to protest, but find more creative ways to be as disruptive as possible. Of course, not vandalism, not you know, hurting and harming anyone, but just ensuring that we make people feel uncomfortable. That is a very necessary component of this movement, because when I think about Breonna Taylor's situation, or Ahmaud Arbery. These two people, Ahmaud Arbery was killed in February and Breonna Taylor was murdered in March. And we didn't hear about any of these situations until people started protesting in May, late May. Some of us got calls saying, hey, turn up, turn out, and make your voices heard about these two particular incidents. And that's where we started to see arrest and unrest, if you will, around these issues. So I think the protest piece is super important. And again, I don't want anyone to think that when we say going from protest to power, that we don't value the front end of that protest. On the power side, going back to Breonna Taylor, I think what's been resonating, again, with young people when trying to explain to them the power that is in our hands, especially at the ballot box, is just looking at Breonna Taylor's law. We know that one of the reasons why officers have still not been arrested for the murder of Breonna Taylor is because of no-knock warrants, which is, something that is not just in Louisville, Kentucky. It's also all over the state of Kentucky and in other states across this country, where officers can approach your home and not give a warning or explain who they are before coming into your residence. How can a no-knock warrant, Star, and you as an attorney can help me, exist at the same time when in the state of Kentucky, you also have the right to fire one warning shot if you feel that your life is in danger? Those two things contradict themselves, because Kenny Walker, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, fired a warning shot because the police were executing a no-knock warrant where they weren't explaining who they were, and he was uncomfortable and nervous, and therefore he fired a warning shot, and they returned with at least 30 bullets in which they shot into the home of a neighbor that had a 5-month-old baby sleeping in the apartment. So those two things can't exist at the same time. So as a part of the campaign that we had a young sister by the name of Katora, who works for the ACLU on the ground in Louisville, Alicia Keys and Cardi B and Gabrielle Union and Iman and so many got together, Rhapsody got together and helped to put out a campaign that uplifted what was happening locally, people fighting against no-knock warrants. And one of the things that we said in our PSA that my organization, Until Freedom, helped to produce was that people needed to call their local city council person and tell them to vote to ban no-knock warrants. And so we went from folks in the street to people picking up the phone. And in the ad, people said to me, well, why are you, because it was my role to give the action steps. And people came to me and said, why are you telling Louisville residents specifically to call Louisville city council persons when anyone can call? Let's just blow up the phones. And I said, no, that's not how we get this done. Yes. The power is that if you live on a street in Louisville and you can call your city council person and say, my name is Miss Susan and I live on X block and I voted for you. And I have expectations that you will vote for Breonna Taylor's law and ban no-knock warrants. That resonates more than someone from New York calling across the country to Louisville, because they don't feel any responsibility, but they feel it when they know that their voters are engaged. And so I think that we have to look at both sides. Push the protest, make sure we're on the ground, but then find those things in the law that leave loopholes where our lives are literally in danger, and ensure that we are engaged on that level, that our vote is directly connected to the marching that we're doing on the streets.
Absolutely, and it completely lines up with what Dr. King just laid out in terms of getting involved on your local level. Tamika, looking at the landscape of the 2020 civil rights protests, we're really seeing engagement like never before from all communities in this country and elsewhere. There seems to be this perception that this movement at this time right now is different. Do you think it's different? And if so, what's different this time?
I think a part of what's different is COVID-19. And most people may not you know, acknowledge that, but I hope that we do. Because folks were sitting at home watching Ahmaud Arbery be hunted and shot down. And then they heard about and experienced Breonna Taylor's murder. And then they saw George Floyd being shot to death. Being choked to death and calling for his mother and his other family members. And I think at that point, it was just too much, especially when you're thinking about the context of 40 million people being unemployed, folks feeling stressed, communities being stretched by hospital visits, fear, grandma and grandpa may have passed on because of COVID, that in itself. And the element that folks don't always remember until I remind them is that the videos didn't actually start with Ahmaud Arbery. They started in New York City with police officers literally beating Black people damn near to death because they weren't properly socially distancing by the guidelines. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was when the young woman, the Latina woman, was on the train platform and she was arrested in front of her child because she didn't have her mask up over her face. The internet blew up with people who were saying, why are we locking people up and using enforcement for Black folks when you guys are in the park passing out masks and giving public safety and public health information to white people? So that kind of started the energy around people paying attention. And then you see these 3 murders play out. And I think at the point that George Floyd calls for his mother, enough became just enough. And I think that the entire, not just this country, but I think people all over the world had a shared experience that something is wrong here. And I may not understand all of the details, but I know that what I'm seeing is not right.
And Tamika, it's so interesting, no matter what we say about our voice may not matter, everybody needs to remember that those videotapes of all of these incidents were in existence before we knew about them. Right. And things didn't change because those videotapes existed. It changed because we saw those videotapes and called for change. Right. And that's why the movement is as powerful as it is this time, in my opinion. You know, one of the concepts that we've heard come out of this police action against the African-American community is this concept of defunding the police. And I'm one that rejects the premise of the question of defunding the police unless you are actually going to articulate what that means. Right. Defunding the police makes everybody's eyes go crazy. When in reality, people are talking about a reallocation of resources to community-oriented safety measures so that you don't need the level of police. Can you explain the concept of defunding police?
So I think that, you know, folks often get nervous about language. Even when Black Lives Matter first came out, there were some people, let's just be honest, Black people who were saying, well, why do we have to say Black? You know, all people matter, and people get nervous about that. And after a while, they kind of come along. I think that if it is helpful to folks, instead of thinking about defunding police, I think they need to imagine or look at what it is to reimagine public safety. Because public safety does not have to mean enforcement. Police officers today show up at protests in military equipment. Why do we need officers? I think about when I was in Minneapolis, and I attended several protests all over the city. There was things happening outside of the county attorney's home, outside of the police officer's home. And wherever folks were not dealing with militarized police, they were singing their songs. They were talking their crap, speaking passionately about how they felt, but they weren't burning anything down. They weren't being violent in any way. You saw that behavior when they were met with military force, including tear gas and rubber bullets, because then we're in a war. And at this point, folks begin to behave as such. We're not even going to talk about, and Dr. King and I have spoke about this several times, the detractors who are in our movement, the people who are there literally to cause dissension and to create distractions. So there are folks that are not even with us that are throwing bricks and burning down things just so that they can change the narrative or create tension. So when I think about reimagining public safety, I think about what it would have meant when people were upset about George Floyd, and they had every right to be upset, that they would go to the streets to protest. And instead of being met with militarized police, they would be met with individuals from the police, from some department, who are willing to talk to them, to talk them down, to say, we understand how you feel and we know you're traumatized. And here's what it is that we're working on. Here's how we intend to make changes in this city to benefit people, you know, better. What if when Rayshard Brooks was sleeping in that car, they didn't have to call 911 and have a police officer to come there, but instead they could get someone else, or maybe a counselor who could come to try to figure out what is his situation? What if there were people there to help de-escalate versus that escalate drama and tension? And so in order to do that, we have to invest in in mental health services. We have to invest in the education system and make sure we're not losing counselors, but we're gaining counselors. We're getting even more counselors to be in our school system. We have to make sure that housing and drug treatment programs and all of those things are strong. So why can't we take a few dollars from the billions of dollars that the police department, I'm not even at the point, and you know, I'm an abolitionist, so I could speak to abolishing police and figuring out for ourselves what it looks like to police our own communities. But we're not, they don't want to deal with that yet. That's too far. So what about just bringing the budget down to reallocate resources, as you said, Star, to help communities with the services that they need? Because I think we're giving police officers an impossible job. Asking them to show up at Miss Mary's house where she has a child who is mentally challenged that this officer does not care about, does not know, does not even have the skill set to address. And we're sending them there to deal with a family crisis. That's a problem. Meanwhile, folks don't like defund, but they've been defunding our communities and our services forever. So I think it's reimagining what it looks like to make sure, because guess what? This is the last thing I'll say on this. Keisha and Ray know better than anyone what's about to go down at 3 o'clock. They know what's going to happen. If you empower them with the right resources, they can help to de-escalate that situation, to go get Johnny's mother and try to pull it back. But they don't have the support that they need to do that work in their own community.
I think you have just laid it all out very, very eloquently. And people should know the safest communities in our country are not the ones with the most police. They're the ones with the most services.
That's right.
When you have a good educational system, a good healthcare system, adequate food sources and jobs and affordable housing, you have a safer community. Right. TAMIKA, thank you so very, very, very much. We're going to keep you around because there are so many questions that our young members from across our regions want to get into with you. And I certainly have a couple more myself. Thank you very much for really just putting it in perspective of where we are and where we want to be going. And speaking of our young members, it's now my pleasure to introduce our next presenters. Our undergraduate members are leading this charge for Alpha Kappa Alpha, and I'm just so proud that our leadership, the board of directors, has recognized that this is going to come from the ground up, and that's from our undergraduates. And so I'm very pleased to introduce you to two of our undergraduate members who are represented on this panel. First, Sora KAYLEN D. Long, who is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. She graduated from Mercer University Honors College in Macon, Georgia in 2019, where she majored in both political science and international affairs. She was initiated into the Iota Ada chapter in the fall of 2016. And since then, she's held several leadership positions on both the chapter and international levels with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She is a 2017 Leadership Fellow and currently serves as an undergraduate member at large on the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated Board of Directors. Over the past year, KAYLEN worked on Capitol Hill with Congressman John Lewis and Congressman Sanford. She plans to attend law school in the fall. And she told me I didn't have to say this, but I love to put it out there. She aspires to be the governor of the great state of Georgia one day. Our other member, Sora Braxton Simpson, is joining us. And Braxton is a senior at Tennessee State University, where she has a double major in agricultural sciences and political science. She was initiated in the Alpha Psi chapter and currently serves as president of the chapter. She's been selected as a 2020 Leadership Fellow and serves as International Undergraduate Representative to the Membership Intake Process Committee. Braxton is currently joining us from Northeast Nebraska, where she is interning for a third year at Bayer Crop Science. She operates an apparel business and is in her fourth season of her own Instagram Live series titled Woke Wednesday. You go, Braxton. She plans to continue her community work by addressing food insecurity and health disparities in low-income Black neighborhoods. She also plans to attend law school upon graduation from Tennessee State in 2021 to study and become a civil rights attorney. And so I have two future colleagues right here, right now. And so I'm going to put the question to you, KAYLEN and Braxton. What have our undergraduate members shared with you as to how they would like to engage and move us from protest to power? And I'll start with you, KAYLEN.
So I think undergraduates are doing just that. And we're not only talking about it, but we're doing it. We're out in the streets in the middle of a pandemic, we're literally protesting and advocating for people that look like ourselves. We're retweeting and reposting and doing everything we can to inform each other, even communities that don't look like us, and having those uncomfortable conversations and normalizing talking about how a certain group of us go throughout the world feeling the inequities and the unfair justice. We bear it every single day. And I think people like myself, younger people, we're doing that. We're talking about it and making sure that we don't miss a news cycle and making sure that we're staying on top of it so you don't forget their names. And I think that we're doing a pretty good job of it because we're still talking about it, and hopefully we keep talking about it until some people do get the justice they deserve. Until they do finally arrest the cops of Breonna Taylor, I think that we should keep this momentum going. So.
And KAYLEN, just so that everyone knows, the reason that we are actually doing this town hall, this virtual forum, is because of the leadership of our undergraduate sorors. Our members insisted that Alpha Kappa Alpha put ourselves out there in this. And this leadership came from our undergraduates. And so that's the kind of service organization Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority is. We listen to our undergraduates because you are the leaders that'll take us to the next level. Braxton, I come to you. What are you hearing right now from our undergraduate members as to how they'd like to engage and move from protest to power?
Yes, now more than ever, I think many of us have come into consciousness, and, we're being forced to look at our place in the world and truly evaluate where we fit. And, our undergraduate members have shared the need and want for a cohesive national agenda. We're on the grounds, we're protesting, we're registering to vote with intentions to rock the vote, signing petitions, bringing awareness via social media to the plight of Black people. But it's like, where do we go from here? What direction do we move in? We need opportunities in the economic realm. We need more education around civic engagement and voters education and registration. We need guidance on how to protest against racism anywhere that it's rooted until it's destroyed, by way of legislation and policy.
And I love that you are actually seeking guidance from your peers as well as from generations older and younger. We always learn from everybody around us as we're in a constant state of learning. But KAYLEN, let me come back to you and ask you, what do you think are the priorities right now criminal justice, economic security, education, healthcare. Where is your mindset and where are you putting your energies?
I think all of those are very pertinent issues and should be priorities. I don't want us to lose sight of healthcare and economic security, but I do think right now criminal justice reform or the criminal justice system probably is the most pressing concern, mainly because it's what's got people in the streets. The criminal justice system right now is probably heightened this moment of civil unrest within our country today. You know, the ability for cops to feel as though you can walk into someone's home and literally kill someone, an innocent person, and then walk. And to be able to, Black lives are being taken every day by police, and we know about them or we don't. But justice isn't being done until it's one, being filmed, and then there's a public uproar following it. So I think right now, the criminal justice reform would probably be the most pressing issue. And I think that, like I said before, I think that our communities are doing what we can do as of right now. I think Braxton hit on a great point by saying that we do need the idea of some national agenda and some focus. We don't have the central leader that the 50s and 60s era had. Like, we don't have a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or the Malcolm X type figure. But I believe it was Ella Baker that says that we need to, even without a leader or not, we still need to galvanize and keep the movement going, because even when that leader is gone, we want the movement to keep going. So I think right now, the criminal justice reform issue, I believe is probably the most pressing issue. And then once we can tackle that issue and make sure that we feel safe being governed by those who are supposed to protect us, then we can move on to the more pressing issues like education and healthcare.
You know, Kaylin, it's very interesting because people, unless you feel safe and secure in your person and in your home, it's very difficult to focus your attention on education and healthcare and even economic security. Safety is of utmost importance. But as Dr. Bernice King pointed out beautifully early on, Braxton, local involvement is absolutely necessary for this movement to have some momentum that is staying. So what do you see as the role of your generation in shaping policy through the election of our next generation of public servants? And I'm talking local, state, and federal.
Yeah, you know, I think it's important to note the role that young people have played in this movement. You know, we brought about change that is indicative of our ability to change the world. If we simply just look at the progress within the last 4 weeks, we've gotten major states to tear down Confederate monuments. We've pressed major companies to, you know, reevaluate their practices. And we've even influenced countries from all across the world to acknowledge that Black lives really do matter. And throughout history, it was young people who have changed the world. And this moment's no different. You know, we're the ones who'll be serving as mayors, city councilmen and women, senators, even governors like KAYLEN wants to be. And, you know, our future lives and the lives of our children is dependent on the moves that we make now. We don't have a choice but to push the gas right now at this time. And, you know, in the context of social justice, as Black people, we have yet to reach an abundant life, you know, a life without struggle, without disparities, without discrimination. And this nation's policies need to address those inequities in every facet of our lives by living up to what it said it was going to do. So, you know, which is that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And if all of us have yet to reach an abundant life without pain, suffering, and inequality, then we still have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Both of you have aspirations to become lawyers. So future colleagues, how do you plan to use your legal education to affect policy in the future? KAYLEN?
Like you said earlier, I'm very, very premature in this journey of in the legal field, but I would like to think that I would just be able to ensure a community where we all feel safe, and to continue to fight the good fight, to make sure that all the laws that are governing us are being held to the correct standard, and make sure that the law is being used in the right way to protect those versus the serve as some type of systematic or institutional barrier to keep other people away from doing what they're supposed to be able to do, or the rights that they're afforded in this country. So God willing, I would like to think that I would be able to continue to get fight and to make this country a little bit better, better in the sense that we all feel protected. So we're not having the same conversations 60 years from now, 100 years from now, so that we can actually utilize the law to do what it's supposed to do and to help us and to govern us and protect us. So hopefully I'll be able to dibble and dabble in a little bit of that.
And that's hope for all of us. Braxton, what about you? How do you plan to use your legal education to affect policy in the future?
Yes, I'm inspired by the great works of Thurgood Marshall, Mallory Davis, Lee Merritt, Areva Martin, and countless others who have, dedicated their lives toward protecting Black bodies by way of law and by policy. As mentioned earlier, my first love is agriculture. And, most recently, I obtained a second major in political science because I realized, the plight on our people in every aspect, even in agriculture. And growing up, I kind of saw firsthand the discrimination that took place in the school system and how I was treated in comparison to other students, how, many people I saw that looked like me doing things that I wanted to do, representation. And so, seeing all of those things, I want to use my legal education to fight for my people, to give them the voice and equality that they deserve, and play my part in reaching justice for our community.
Well, I think law is going to be in good hands if we get the two of you to join the ranks. Thank you so very much. I want to thank KAYLEN Long and Braxton Simpson for really putting this in perspective with the people who are leading this movement, and that is our younger generation and our younger members of Alpha Kappa Alpha. I am excited to bring back Dr. Bernice King and TAMIKA Mallory for the question and answer portion of our evening. And this time we're going to do something that is really, really, really makes me excited. We're going to have the Q&A done in a town hall format from undergraduate representatives across our regions. And so right now you're going to be meeting all of our undergraduate representatives. You've already met Braxton Simpson and KAYLEN Long, but to begin our Q&A session is the second International Vice President of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I like to think of her as my young mentee because she has the position that I held as an undergraduate. Member and soror Casey A. Coleman from the Great Lakes region. Casey, if you will start us out with a question to the panel.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Black people everywhere have come together to demand effective policies to protect our communities. But we also need allies. How do we approach conversations with non-Black people who want to be our allies in support of this movement?
Thank you so much, Casey. And I'm going to actually put that question to Dr. Bernice King, because it's been our experience that the movement is going to need everybody's hands, all hands on deck. So this question I'll put to you. Dr. King? And I think she may be muted. Okay, yeah, there we are.
The host muted me. I don't want to simplify this, but it's something that we just have to do. I mean, when I've looked at everything that has occurred recently, the quote unquote allies are already there. They're side by side with you, protesting in the streets. They are galvanizing with you in various places that you are convening. And it's just a matter of continuing to cultivate and educate in the process, because I do think there is a learning curve for what we're calling allies. I struggle with the word allies, and the only reason I do is because at some point we've got to educate white people and others that racism is not Black people's problem. It's a problem in our humanity, and it's something that threatens the state of who we are as human beings. And they have to see it as something that they too are part of, and have to do their work of learning how we got here and the privileges that they enjoy and the things that they're going to have to be prepared to sacrifice for, because we've suffered, we've sacrificed. Most of them have not necessarily done that. And so they need to join in this struggle with us, and be willing to pay the same prices that we are. But then, you know, I feel a little uncomfortable in saying this because some of them in your generation are already there. It's the ones that before your generation that sat on the sidelines, that were indifferent, that were in the ivory towers and enjoying their privilege. But, you know, I've just seen over and over again, I've seen, you know, many white, and I'm going to use the word for this conversation, but many, I'll call them white brothers and sisters, who stood on the front of those protests, you know, locked in arms between the law enforcement and the members of the Black community. I thought that was a powerful representation. That said that this generation understood what it means to stand not just side by side with my Black brothers and sisters, but be willing to take the hit for them. And so, you know, that's the way I see it. I think while you have them, continue to educate them, because this generation is actually teaching previous generations. I don't know if all of us saw this video that went, I think it went viral, this young girl who was confronting her parents about their racism, a white girl. And I was like, wow, this is what's probably happening in homes all across America. And frankly, part of the reason that I think white people are leaning in is because our young brothers and sisters have come alongside of what's taking place. And you know, unfortunately, when they take notice, when they get involved, it becomes, you know, a real issue that we need to address. And it shouldn't be that way. Injustice should be something we address. But for whatever reason, when more white people join, people are more sensitized and say, oh, we need to suddenly do something.
It's like you need a validation over there. I'm going to move to the next question, and this question is going to be asked by member Sarah Holly J.B. Weeks, and Holly is from the South Central region. Holly, your question?
With over 140 Confederate symbols in the states of Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, why is it important for young people to advocate for Confederate symbols to be removed and dismantled, like the recent removal of the Mississippi state flag?
So how pertinent right now this week? And I'm going to ask this question to TAMIKA. TAMIKA, can you please address Holly's question?
Well, you know, Holly, we notice that there are some people who are really trying to protect these statues and monuments as well. So that gives you an idea of how important it is right there, that the same folks who have extremely racist rhetoric, who don't believe in Black Lives Matter, or who don't support our movement, are some of the same folks who are willing to even to have police presence to try to protect these monuments. What do they mean? Why are they important? When I heard the president, who remains nameless, when I heard him say, these are our monuments, these are our statues, that let me know that, just as he said a few years ago, that he's a nationalist, that those two things go together. There's a protection of this history. And so long as the history hails over our communities and hails over our country, I don't think that we can move forward. I come from I struggle with this mindset, Star, that it's nice to take, say, J. Edgar Hoover's name off of the FBI building. But if you haven't cleared out the J. Edgar Hoover mindset from the building, then are we really doing something just because we're taking it's almost like leave it up there until the evilness has actually been dredged out from the institution. But I also understand the importance of ensuring that we don't have monuments hanging across this country, flags hanging across this country that represent the worst of our time, the worst of our nation. And so I support anyone who is engaged in the fight to remove those monuments, because as long as they fly over us, as long as they are hailed as being important pieces of our history, then there are those who believe in it, who are, I mean, we saw yesterday that there were folks with arms. They took up arms to go and protect monuments. And those are the same people who would kill Ahmaud Arbery on the street. So I struggle. I'm in between. I want to see the monuments, the flags, and all those symbols to be destroyed and to be taken down. But I'm not sure that when you take them down, that the mindset and the evilness that's at the root of racism in this country is going to disappear.
And Dr. King, I saw you nodding your head, so I wonder if you might have a comment as it relates to this topic.
Nothing, only, you know, what she just said. I mean, I know where I personally stand is what TAMIKA just mentioned, is that, you know, it's a symbol, and until that symbol and what it represents is etched out of and taken out of the hearts and the thinking of people, we've removed the symbol, but we haven't removed what represents the symbol. But I honor, people are at different places in a movement, you know, and you have to allow for that growth and that development. I'm just at a different place when it comes to these kind of symbols, because to me yesterday, it was just powerful to see the governor of Mississippi, you know, sign legislation that the flag will be removed. It's something that they just came to after years of struggle. I mean, it's amazing in Mississippi at that. But I know even as that flag comes down, you know, when we look at Mississippi, there's a lot of racial issues that are just, you know, bleeding out in Mississippi. So the work is still there to be done.
Right.
Absolutely.
I was just going to add to that, because they have removed, or they're going to remove the flag and change the flag, but yet they haven't closed Parchman Prison, where almost 50 people have died in the prison in Mississippi over the last several months, not a year, but just a few months, because of neglect and poor conditions within the facilities. And Parchman Prison, again, when you talk about those symbols, is a facility that actually was developed immediately following slavery. And so this is, so it in itself, you know, people, I was all about, and I was working with some folks who had a campaign that was like, we have to reform Parchman Prison, reform. And then I heard an elderly leader, scholar, Black woman say, you can't reform it because it's literally sitting on a plantation. And the mindset that is ingrained in the facility is not something that you can patch up. You have to tear it down. So if you're going to take the flag down, you've got to also tear down institutions within Mississippi that are oppressing people. As they're removing the flag, that someone is dying in Parchman Prison.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so very much for that very spirited answer. I'm going to go to our next question, and that's going to be asked by Jasmine McCoy. And Jasmine is from our North Atlantic region. And Jasmine, your question, please. I'm going to make sure that you are unmuted. Can we hear Jasmine? It might be something that is having a problem.
Good evening.
Okay, there you are. Jasmine.
Good evening, everyone. My question is, looking ahead to the fall, how can undergrads get their college administrations to address racism and other forms of discrimination on campus?
Well, that clearly is going to go straight to Braxton, since you are going to be, what are you going to be, a senior this year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so Braxton, what do we have to look forward to?
Yes, so personally, I attend an HBCU. And as for many students that attend HBCUs, we're reminded of, you know, our worth every single day. We're nurtured by our professors who too understand the plight of Black people. And, you know, we're taught and built up about how to interact in a world that doesn't necessarily see you as equal. But looking forward ahead to the fall, I think HBCUs could start to look at its partnerships and consider severing ties with institutions and organizations that do not support the end of systemic racism. And furthermore, are involved in the exploitation of Black people and or progression of maintaining inequality. Organizations that don't support Black people and that don't support Black students have no room or place at any institution. And I believe that if undergraduates could begin to do their research and really look at, who we are in partnership with and what companies are commonly seen on our campuses benefiting from the works and effort of our Black students, they should indeed have plans to support us.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to go to our next question, and that is from Lanique Williams, who is from our international region. So Lanique, your question, please.
Young leaders in the international region are faced with the challenge of not being connected geographically to the United States and its resources. What are some strategies you can recommend that we use to impact our communities as we advocate for change?
And that is the perfect question for our undergraduate member at large. KAYLEN, you serve on the board of directors of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So that puts you on the in the room where the decisions are made, at the table where decisions are made. So your advice to Lanique, what would you say?
That was a great question, Lanique. Personally, I think that the same thing kind of exists in the international region in different countries, and even the Bahamas or any other province. I think that you still have to do the same thing that you do in the domestic form of the United States, as when it comes to voting, when it comes to getting involved within your communities on the local, state, and federal level to advocate for change and to voice your opinions on your campuses and within your communities. And it goes both ways. As far as being connected to the United States and their resources, I still think that you can reach out to the United States. And using your social media presence, I think it's a lot easier than it has been in the past to get information and to also spread awareness of any issues that's going on within the community in which you live in. So I think if you are able to use your voice and use your own platform as a social media campaign, or use your own chapter, or even your school or your community or your church or whatever community you can galvanize, and to start talking about those issues and voicing them and taking the right steps to do something about them. And you can always use your network of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated to get the job done, of course. But then again, you can take it into your own hands and use your own network to reach out for assistance and to do the groundwork yourself. And I think as long as we keep talking about it and you vote and you stay involved with your school board or your professors and your city councilmen and the same institutions, and I think that you're in the right place to start advocating for some change.
Thank you, KAYLEN. Our next question is going to come from Taylor Colton from the Mid-Atlantic region. Taylor, your question is?
Hi, everyone. So in the wake of the death of George Floyd, everyone has talked about how the recent spark in the Black Lives Matter movement feels different this time. What are some innovative ways for us to take action beyond the protests to ensure that we can make a lasting impact for us and the lives after that follow?
And TAMIKA, you and I started to talk about this when we the first part of the program. Can you make some suggestions for Taylor right now?
So Taylor, I've been telling folks that I think while we're marching, we've got to stop on a few streets. We need to make sure we're marching down the census street, because if we are not counted, then all of this that we're doing and the desire for our communities to have the resources that we deserve, it will be for naught. And we know that we have to ensure that our people understand the importance of getting counted, especially when you can close your eyes and imagine that there are many white people who are in power that are literally losing their minds right now that this country is browning, because they understand that if we knew our power and if we knew that filling out that census form would actually redirect resources and services to our community based upon, you know, what is supposed to happen. I'm sure we'll have to fight that also, but if it's done properly, the resources should come to our community. They know that if we knew our power, that we would be running to the computer, to the mailbox or whatever to ensure that every single person who lives in our community is counted, and we wouldn't allow these boogeyman theories to get in the way of us taking care of our business from a census perspective. And so if you know of someone who you don't think has filled it out, or you don't think that they know or don't have access to the census, you need to figure it out and help them. I think we also got to be marching down the street of voter registration. When I think about COVID-19, Star, I'm worried that the most dedicated voting bloc in our community, which is our elders, have been extremely impacted by COVID-19, whether it be being on the side of, you know, extreme sickness and even death, or being just afraid. They want to live, they don't want to die. And so people are not going to run to the polls in the ways in which they would have. And I mean, people don't even want to be in vans together and in closed spaces traveling to go and vote. And the numbers are beginning to spike in the South, in some of the exact states where we actually need people to turn out more than ever. So we're gonna have to register what they say, lottie dottie and everybody. We're gonna have to get everybody to the polls because we have to overcompensate for the voter suppression. You know, Donald Trump has said that he does not want to invest in the postal service. He would not offer any resources from the stimulus package to the postal service to help strengthen them during this COVID-19 time. And then he put his homie in charge. His homeboy is the postmaster now. So, you know, this is obviously not a forum. I don't know if we're speaking under the AKA's C4 or C3. So I'm just gonna say these are TAMIKA Mallory's comments and not the AKA's. Dr. Glover, tell me to shut up if I shouldn't say these things. But I mean, we're in a serious time period. And what's happening is that they already have begun to think of the strategies for voter suppression. And so if we know our people are disenfranchised already and they actually gonna cheat at the polls, that means we got to get everybody to the polls and make sure that, or to fill out our absentee ballots and make sure that we vote like we've never voted before. And I think that's the third part, is marching down that street of actually showing up. It can't be too cold. It can't rain that day too much. It can't be, I don't feel well. There is absolutely nothing that can get in the way of all of us showing up to ensure that every single time that we complain, that we actually pull the lever. You know, they don't do that anymore, but it makes sense for what I'm trying to say here, that we make sure that we cast that ballot in this coming election. It doesn't even matter to me who you vote for, but, don't be a coward. Show up. Show up.
Yes, you know what? You can't argue if you don't show up. Go right ahead.
Can I add something to
absolutely
what TAMIKA was saying? I think there's another area that we have continually fallen short in as a people, and that is not having an organized voice lobbying for our interest. For some reason, we have not created groups and organizations that are able to disseminate information to our community so we know what's happening, because what occurs over and over again, it's like we're backpedaling because things happen and then we're now reacting to something that we should have had knowledge of on the forefront when it was developing. For instance, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. Many people were not aware of it until it happened in our communities. And if people had known what was, coming up, what was, bubbling up, we could have given some strategy to the people so that the voices could be heard and things that we need to do to try to prevent these kinds of things. And I'm thinking of something that just occurred here in Georgia. There's legislation that was passed, hate crime legislation. And there were many people working to ensure that certain provisions were not placed in there to give further protection to law enforcement, police officers, and even some extra hate crime protections to first responders. And they took it out of the hate crime legislation, but in the wee hours of the night, they slipped it into another piece of legislation. This stuff goes on and on and on and on and on. And we don't have enough presence at the state level and at the federal level. And we've got to correct that in our communities. Yeah. Who's our voice on Capitol Hill? And how do we make sure we are connected to that voice? Because the masses of our people are not.
Yeah, and I was just, if I could just add really quickly, and I think that the collaboration piece is going to be so important because no one group, no one organization is going to reach all of our people. And sometimes we leave people behind because our cliques, we're so clicked up, we're so elite in the ways in which we do things. I tell people all the time that some of our organizations are too elite to help the people we claim we're here working on behalf of. And when I think about collaboration, I know that some of my family from Alabama A&M University are listening in. And I have to say that during the time when all of these protests were happening and we didn't have the resources to even stay out there on the streets, we were trying to support local groups. It was the support of that institution where Black folks were like, we're going to give our dollars. We may not actually be able to get there to Minneapolis to walk with you, to support you, but we're going to give our dollars to help support the milk, to clean out the protesters' eyes from the tear gas. I think we can't be disconnected from all the different elements of our movement. We have to make sure that, as Dr. King just spoke about, that we are advocating, that we have sophisticated movements just like they do to share information, but that we're also using our resources to uphold those people whose pants might be hanging down, running, protesting back and forth on the street, and so that no stone is left unturned. Star, you are muted.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so very much, ladies. Technology, we're going to get it together no matter what. I am now going to move to our next question, and that is going to come from Tatiana Oates from our Central region. And Tatiana, your question is:
what can African American college students do on their majority campuses to hold university officials accountable for their efforts to retain and graduate African American students?
I'm going to actually ask our undergraduate members to take this question on. KAYLEN, you want to start? Do you have any ideas? And I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Now you're back.
So Tatiana, could you repeat that one more time for me? I'm sorry.
What can African American college students do on their majority campuses to hold university officials accountable for their efforts to retain and graduate African American students?
Okay, I think that once again is normalizing those conversations and talking to your leadership on at your school and making sure that your Black students do matter. So I think if you're not already having those conversations, and especially specifically if you're talking about organizations of AKA, you have a graduate chapter, you have adults, or you have other people who can advocate on your behalf and know the importance of Black lives and Black students and how important it is for us to, there's certain barriers that are put in place that African American students, especially on a majority white campus, that they go through that their white counterparts don't go through. We may not have the same resources or the same relationship with our teachers, or we may go through you know, we have different interactions on campus than, you know, white counterparts. And I would say that most people, a lot of people probably endure those things, but I think we have to talk about them, because a lot of, you see a lot in this day and age that people don't, it's really hard for adults to recognize their privilege, especially, you know, it's like almost like an awakening. It's like, so I think once you have those conversations and force them to understand the burdens that you share and that how it is and the things that we're struggling with, then I think that we can get a better retention rate, and we maybe can take some of those resources and to create some services to help assist with African Americans graduating and staying in school and getting the things they need to do to excel in school. I think one, talking about them, and then maybe trying to mobilize some type of in some type of way to get the resources that you need to actually to help students achieve.
Braxton, do you have anything you'd like to contribute to that question?
Yes, ma'am. So first, I think that, you know, they must see this as an issue and one that is a priority. You know, and they must be well informed on the topic and be able to address the administration from a well position of just facts and experience. Secondly, you know, they must organize and use their collective voices to share viable solutions to the problem. Like at an HBCU, PWI administrators and staff must believe in its students and be willing to go above and beyond to ensure that all of the students have the best educational experience that will adequately prepare them to excel after graduation. They have to possess a spirit of no student will be left behind. So, you know, this has to include a commitment to ensuring their campus is a safe place for Black students to learn and grow socially, emotionally, and academically. Furthermore, it should also include intentional early identification of talented students. So providing opportunities to engage with the school through special programming designed to prep students for the career field, providing resources that, you know, will allow for on-campus mentoring, tutoring, programming that just recognizes, values, and supports the Black experience on their campus. These schools have to be committed to providing career readiness skills, internships, seminars, specifically geared towards the Black students. And they should intentionally target companies to provide Black students with learning experiences outside of the classroom that will. You know, and as the second student trustee on the TSU's Board of Trustees, and as a fourth year student at TSU, my president, Dr. GLENDA Baston-Glover, she truly encourages strides and, you know, active work in addressing social justice issues. And so it's just been a great experience from that standpoint.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate just the drilling down on that particular question. Let's go to our next question from Allison Coates from our Midwestern region. Allison?
Good evening. How can we as a community and organization help build the education system within our Black communities to close the disparity gap between our white counterparts?
What a great question. Dr. King and Tamika, Dr. King, you are a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. Tamika, you have been encouraging the collaboration of different organizations. So this question definitely is for both of you. We'll start with you, Tamika. As a community, how do we build the education system within our Black communities to close that disparity gap?
Yeah, I think we have, I don't know all of the mechanics of the how, because I try not to speak on things that are not necessarily in my wheelhouse, but I do know that it has to be done because the same system that beats you is not going to properly teach you. And the ways in which we have been abused and traumatized by this system, we can't possibly think that our young people and the institutions in general are properly providing the services, the resources, and the education that our young people need. I mean, you know, even when you think about Tulsa, Oklahoma, Juneteenth, now Rosewood, in August, where people in Jacksonville, Florida were literally beat to death by police and white folks. Many of our young people have no idea about that history. So it's very difficult for them, even when they're in protest movements, to understand that, as my mother would say, there's nothing new under the sun. And there are things that we can learn from our past that can help to inform some of what it is that we're doing today. So I can't say all the ways in which we get there, but I do know that the educational perspective is probably going to be the most important and the most powerful, especially since we see that our young people, very, very young kids, are watching this movement and trying to figure out, what does this mean for me and what do I do with it? Especially since I go to school with white kids every day, and I don't see race in the ways in which I hear it being discussed on TV or by my parents.
Dr. King, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think there are two things that we can look at considering. One is to look at corporations and making a demand on them to partner with these school districts so that we can begin to close that gap. There are human resources in our corporations. I think we let them off the hook too much in the United States of America. We put a lot of pressure and demand on our government, rightfully so. But corporate America has a responsibility and obligation to us. Most of them, all of them, I would say, were built on the back. This country was built on the back of slaves. The economy was built on the back of slaves and slavery. So there's a debt that is owed to our community. And a lot of the money that's being given now, some of it we have to help direct it. And I think one form is to help them to partner with school districts to help to make up for deficits, providing for their employees to go into some of those schools as mentors, as tutors, etc. But on the other hand, they can set aside funds so that we can begin to create our own schools, to do some of the things that Tamika is talking about. So I think it's a two-pronged approach.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. We have one more question, and this is from Ariane Stone from our far western region. Ariane, your question.
Thank you. As we move from this historical moment in time with the pandemic and civil unrest, and seek to take action beyond social media activism, what other impactful strategies can the younger generation utilize to effectuate change and make racial equity a priority for policymakers?
And I think, Dr. King, this is really your bailiwick right here. If you don't mind wrapping us up, I would appreciate that.
Can I hear the question again?
Yes, Ariane, will you repeat it one more time, please?
Yes, I can. Yes, of course. What other impactful strategies besides social media activism can the younger generation utilize to effectuate change and make racial equity a priority for policymakers?
You know, all of us are connected in some way to people who work for, I'm going back to corporate America because I just don't want to let them off the hook. All of us are connected to them in some form or fashion. Some of us work in corporate America. Some of us have loved ones that work in corporate America. And one of the things that dawned upon me is that most corporations have lobbyists in Washington. And there's got to be some pressure put on these corporations to do what my father talked about, which is have this revolution of values and realigning their corporate strategies to that revolution of values. If they're leaning in now, we need them to support policies that support our community. And we got to pressure them in that regard. We're not placing before them, look, these are the 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 policies. We are your customer base. These are the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 policies that we need your corporation to get behind. Use your lobbyists. You know, you're paying for those lobbyists. Use those funds to make sure that you support these 4, 5, 6, 7 items, this equity agenda. Again, we got to bring them into this whole movement and not let them off the hook, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that run America.
Absolutely. I thank you all so very, very much. We are just about out of time. I hope that the audience has enjoyed this virtual forum and town hall. At this time, please allow me to thank all of our presenters for lending their time and their expertise to this extremely important topic. This has been a spirited conversation. And again, I want to thank our undergraduate members of Alpha Kappa Alpha for making sure we put a focus in this direction. Thank you very much for your leadership, and thank to the leadership of Alpha Kappa Alpha for listening to our young members of the organization. We again want to acknowledge our sponsor for tonight's town hall, PineSol. I'd like you to stay tuned for more information on PineSol's initiative to celebrate Black women entrepreneurs through their Build Your Legacy program. And Alpha Kappa Alpha is excited about our growing partnership with PineSol. Plus, please stay tuned for a special recap presentation of tonight's town hall, produced by our very own Second International Vice President, Casey A. Coleman. She is extremely talented. So on behalf of the leadership of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, I want to thank you for joining us. I wish you a great evening. I ask that you remember that Black Lives Matter. I think it was one of the panelists said that there's always a question of saying all lives matter. I like to remind you that on a street, all houses matter, but if yours is not burning, it's okay for the fire department to focus on mine for a while. Black Lives Matter. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Thank you all again. I'm very pleased to tell you that this is the second in the Serious Matter series, and we are looking forward to our next one. So please stay tuned. That's our call to action. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Greetings, sorors. This message is about the civil unrest currently sweeping our country. Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority strongly condemns the senseless killings of Black women, Black men, and our Black children in the United States, resulting from unlawful, unnecessary, and excessive use of force by police and those playing vigilante watchmen.
About America is that individual citizens and groups of citizens can petition their government, can protest, can speak truth to power. And that is sometimes messy and controversial, but because of that ability to protest and engage in free speech, America over time has gotten better. We've all benefited from that.
This is a coordinated activity happening across this nation. And so we are in a state of emergency. Black people are dying in a state of emergency. We cannot look at this as an isolated incident. The reason why buildings are burning are not just for our brother George Floyd. They're burning down because people here are saying to people in New York, to people in California, to people in Memphis, to people all across this nation, enough is enough.
Yeah. There's those who are truly protesting are directly connected to the issues that my father was addressing in the 50s and the 60s. The issue is there's still two Americas. There's America for Black people, there's America for white people. People who are protesting, legitimately protesting, are trying to raise that issue. We are tired and fed up with the talk. It's time to do the work of dismantling systemic racism, white supremacy, and creating another America, a true America.
Young people have always been at the forefront of social change, equality, and justice. There is power in protest, and we cannot forget that. We can't lose sight of that. There's power in us, and we have to work hard to turn that power into purpose.
shouldn't have to feel like this. We shouldn't have to protest because y'all are treating us wrong. We do this because we need to and have rights.
Growing up Black in America is to be exhausted, outraged, and constantly defending my identity and my purpose.
Enough is enough. This fight is more than a hashtag. It's more than George Floyd. It's more than Breonna Taylor. It's more than Emmett Till. This fight is about all of our Black lives.
Hey! We have nothing to lose but our shame. Louder. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
Lives that were lost in these streets.
Listen.
We're not here to ask for justice.
That's right. That's right.
We're not here to negotiate justice.
That's right.
But we are here to demand justice. Yeah!
And when you talk about that work, what does that work look like to you?
Well, I think we have to start where the hot button is right now. We've got to deal with police reform in this system. We got to deconstruct policing. It was always based in keeping Black people, Negroes, colors, and slaves in check. And so we've got to dismantle all of that and come up with something new.
Look at life and we try to figure out ways to make systems better. You kind of have to first acknowledge the origination of law enforcement, which was to keep Black people in their place. This entire system was created in an effort to catch fugitive slaves who were running towards freedom. Being that this is what law enforcement has been founded on, this system will never work. The system will never work because it was never made for Black people.
Right.
Responsibility of our police department in our community, let's be clear, of the police department in our community is not only to protect and serve, but to make sure that they're doing it run the right way, and making sure that, too, they don't confuse themselves with the judicial system and try to make people innocent or guilty in a timely manner.
From every age, gender, race, and religion have been coming together for weeks to protest injustice against Black people in America. We have a duty as United States Senators to be fully aware of our country's history of systemic racism and a responsibility to take serious action toward achieving America's founding ideal of equal justice under law.
So if you are not coming to the people's defense, then don't challenge us when young people and other people who are frustrated and instigated by the people you pay. You are paying instigators to be among our people out there throwing rocks, breaking windows, and burning down buildings. And so young people are responding to that. They are enraged, and there's an easy way to stop it. Arrest the cops. Charge the cops. Charge all the cops. Not just some of them, not just here in Minneapolis. Charge them in every city across America where our people are being murdered. Charge them everywhere. That's the bottom line. Charge the cops. Do your job. Do what you say this country is supposed to be about, the land of the free for all. It has not been free for Black people, and we are tired.